of the Gap Historical Society. Inc.'s most recent publication, Journey Through Time, Events that Shaped the Gap. From its inception in 1851 until the present day in 2023. 172 years of unprecedented progress. The objects of the Society were to record the past, present and history of the Gap to benefit the circumstances now into its future. The actual publication was due to the desire on my part to provide a worthwhile program that the Society could tackle, and also to provide a historical reference of lasting value to the suburb, to bolster prior outstanding publication produced by previous committees and by the first president, Richard Speechley, deceased. Richard was the author of Reflections, a series of booklets of memories of the Gap, showcasing photos and articles on pioneers of the suburb. Together with the new Timeline Journal, they provide a comprehensive account of a suburb that rose from the small crop farms and dairy into a suburban retreat of major significance in a time frame of residential growth beginning with the first suburban estate in 1952, the Berry Estate, and in 1956 the Ashgrove Park, whose original landowner was Moses Adsett, one of the first 3 settlers in the Gap. In pace with its escalation as a suburban area of major growth, we are fortunate to have educational facilities which keep up with the development. The suburb boasts a high school and several state schools of high calibre. I recommend this publication as a document of high quality, as an important piece of history and knowledge of the growth of one of Brisbane's most populated and modern regions. I wish to pay top marks to my editorial committee of Assistant Editor and Advisor Elaine Zendler, Secretary Treasurer Don Wilshire, and Jacqueline Morin Proctor for their expertise and
Thank you very much, George. It is now, as someone asked me just recently, how long have I been councillor? I've been councillor for 8 years. And as we've just heard George say, there's over 170 years of knowledge, of learnings in the Gap. So I would like to invite the former councillor for the Gap Ward, who has not quite been around for those 170 years, but some might think it was a little close, to say a few words. Ladies and gentlemen, Geraldine Knapp.
Thanks, Steve. Well, I am, to my horror, not 26 inside as my head tells me, but reaching that figure that's got a 7 and an 8 next to it. I loved living in the Gap. I came to live in the Gap. I was a newbie, if you like, coming to live in the Gap when we bought off Hilda Road through that estate through there, which was developed in 1970, and we moved into Bunratty Street in 1977, where the Hilda farm was still sitting up, or one of them was still up the end of the street. Never did I dream that a busybody like me would be elected to be a councillor. But all of a sudden, all my dreams came true when, in 1997, I became the councillor of the Gap Ward. It became obvious that I was lucky that I had the very historic Ashgrove, which was developed in 1880 or earlier than that. And then this development that occurred, and the first estate was down through Ramia Street, which was named after the children of who?
Berry.
Berries. No? Anyway, so Romeo Street was the first subdivision in 1952. Richard Speaktree was an amazing bloke. He'd sort of grown up here, as some of the people who have lived who are here today have grown up in the Gap. They were children of the original settlers of the Gap. And Richard had been writing, as George said, these memories, and he'd been putting it into the Western Echo. Philippa had been writing it. And all of a sudden, Ashgrove started a historical society with the amazing Meta Truscott, who had written a diary every day of her life in Ashgrove. And so it's different experiences of a very old suburb to a really old suburb that wasn't developed till 1952. And so we had a meeting down in the hall underneath the old RSL, which was no longer the RSL hall, but the River City Church, I think, where we decided that we'd start a historical society with Richard as president. And from there, from 2000 to now, everyone's story or everything that was important has been written about the Gap. Richard wrote about the lives of the children who grew up in the Gap. There were 92 residents in the Gap. In 1952, the aerial photos show that it was still a rural little town, and you had to, if you lived in the Gap, there was a bus. No, it wasn't. I think there was a bus by then. There probably wasn't, but you had to get up to the terminus at Ashgrove, and there was a famous old bloke who was famous. He used to go down to the pub at the Normanby, and he drove his rig up there, and then on the way home the horse knew the way to get home because he was too full to get home. So there are amazing stories of the early settlers. It's lovely that there was the opportunity as the Gap grew to name fixtures and places and roads and parks over all of the Gap that reflects all of the early settlers and the families that lived there. And despite the fact that I think there's a generation coming through that's too busy, really, to do what we did, because I was kept for a very long time. I liked being kept, it was terrific, you know. Were we like a generation, we post-baby boomers? Of course we were. We could stay home, look after our children, do all those things that mothers and fathers can't do anymore. They're working post-baby. And the gift to them, whether they like it or not, is the long history of the original development of the Gap and how it was subdivided, and the families that farmed down here. There were still farms when I arrived at the end of Payne Road. So it's important, and I want to thank everybody that was part of the Historical Society, because of you and because of Council, Lord Mayor, where we reached a point where everyone had grown old, and we were running at the Girl Guides hut, the home of, where it became obvious that there was all of this history that needed to be digitised. So the council gave a grant. Deborah worked with Steve, and we were able to get all of the photos digitised and go onto the thing like that. So one of the great experiences I had, besides Save Our Waterways Now, which was that amazing thing that rehabilitated the creeks that were pristine when everyone arrived here and became very unpristine, was the Gap Historical Society, because it was an important element to record the history of the suburb accurately and the experiences, because we can look back at the experiences of people getting married, the church that was built, you know, the families that married into married, all of that stuff was like, it was a little tight little group. And it was important, and I want to congratulate everyone for holding on this long. I know there's nobody ready to take it over, but because of you, because of the work that was done over that whole time, the Gap history is there for children of the next generation to be able to say, we live in this suburb, and this is the generation of one of the oldest suburbs that was subdivided, you know, the original estate. And be able to say, well, I live in this great suburb and this is the history of the Gap. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Councillor Toomey. Thank you, George. and also the committee, particularly the people in the light blue shirts that are involved in the Historical Society. Geraldine, promise not to heckle like you usually do when I speak.
No, I don't.
It was such a great honour to be invited to join you today, and thank you also for bringing out the fancy cups and everything. It's a real honour to be part of this. I've noticed over time that as your life goes on, something changes. When you're young, you're very, very interested in the future, and most of what you think about is about the future. And I guess that's understandable. When you've got your whole life ahead of you, you're thinking about the future. But as time goes on and you get more experience, you realise that there's an incredible wealth and depth of information in the past that you should know about and that other people should know about. And you become more and more interested in history. And I'm at the point now, so I'm 46, lost track of my own age, 46 years old. And so maybe halfway through my life, I don't know, hopefully. And I'm sitting there, I'm looking at the future, and also looking at the past, and I'm becoming more and more interested in the history of not only the world, but our local community and our city. Because one of those things that experience brings is that while technology changes, while places change, while cities change, fundamentally people don't change. People throughout history don't change a lot. And there's an incredible amount to be learned from the past. And in a place like this in particular, which is just a true Eden, there are not too many parts of Brisbane as beautiful and as livable as this. It is truly an amazing part of Brisbane. But one of the things is not just the wonderful natural environment and lifestyle that we have here, it's the people and the community that has developed here. And it is one of the select group of areas of Brisbane which has a really distinctive community feel. There are some parts of every city that have, I guess, some sameness about them. But then there are some really special parts that are quite clearly different. And in Brisbane, you can point to a few of them. And I know I shouldn't single out particular areas, Steve, but I will. The Gap is definitely one of them. You also get a similar feel in a place like Brookfield, which has a great history and in many ways looks similar to it did 100 years ago in that area. And then you find areas like Sandgate and Wynnum that are effectively towns within a city, and they have this really unique feel about them. And so the Gap is one of those places. And when I heard that this work had been done to put together a really extensive history and timeline of everything that has happened in this area, I was really excited. It is so important. I can't overstate the importance of this project happening. Because what will happen is, all of the people living in this wonderful area, one day they'll get to that point where they decide that the history of the area is really, really important, they want to learn about it. But if this group hadn't done what you have done, that history wouldn't be available in such an extensive way. But when people go looking for it, it's also great to hear that this history is going to be put online as well, because I know for most people that's one of the first things they do if they're looking for information. They'll go and look online, they'll look on the internet to see what they can find. And so this work that's been done is incredibly important for such a special part of the city, for such a special community, and for generations to come, this work will be something that is a go-to for people looking for information about this area. I have to say, when I was looking through the information that's been compiled, it reminded me that in this job, no matter how much you know or how much you learn, there's always more that you learn each day. And so I learned some really important things about this area in looking through that history as well. And I was particularly interested, Steve, to see the pushback when there was a proposal to develop, I assume it was a quarry in this area? Was it a big quarry that was proposed to be developed? I think it was the 1960s.
Yep.
Yeah. There's some good rock around here. And it's one of those challenges that every growing city has. Every growing city needs rock, where they find it from. And this was back in the 1960s, a proposal to open up what was a mining lease or a quarrying lease in the area. And back then, the community really came together to say, let's protect the wonderful natural environment. This was before there was the type of environmental movements that we see today. This was just the community coming together to say, we want to protect our area. We want it to stay the way it is, to be this wonderful tree-lined, hilled area. And can you imagine if this area had been turned into a giant quarry? Because that was a real possibility. And so the community came together to help protect what's here and what we all benefit from today in this area. And so that was a fantastic learning for me, and great to see that community spirit back then. I was also interested to see, though, that 100 years ago, there were less than 150 people living in this whole precinct. And like with cities themselves, areas can have very little change for a long period of time and then suddenly they take off. And as Geraldine mentioned, it was the 1950s and 60s that this place really took off, and now is, I think, the most populous suburb in Brisbane. So the largest population of any suburb in Brisbane is in the Gap. And a lot of people don't realise that, because when you look around, it's not really obvious that this is the most populated suburb in Brisbane. You see the greenery, you see what a wonderful environment it is, and you don't realise just how many people live here. And that's a very special thing about this area as well. For this area to be developed in such a way that so many people can live here, but it's done in a way that's, I guess, sensitive to the wonderful natural environment that's here. I will, in summing up, just want to tell you a little story about city planning in this area. And so Brisbane City Council for over a decade introduced a program called neighbourhood planning. And that was about making sure that we could accommodate homes for the people that are moving here, not only from other parts of Australia, but around the world now. And it's been a constant challenge to, in Brisbane, to accommodate all those people that want to move here. And so neighbourhood planning was about making sure the community was involved in that process. And as we progressed through many different neighbourhood plans, the Gap neighbourhood plan was one of the last that we did effectively, because we went through this entire project to try and accommodate new homes, and basically the outcome of that planning process was the Gap should stay pretty much as it is. And that was what the community wanted. That was what we agreed was the appropriate outcome, because there are some parts of Brisbane that are actually good the way they are, and you want to keep what's there. There are other parts that could use a lift, or could use some investment, or could use some revitalisation, but really the Gap is not one of those places. And so our new approach that came out of effectively the Gap neighbourhood plan was, let's look at a process of suburban renewal and suburban renewal precincts instead. And that is specifically identifying areas that might have industrial or commercial uses at the moment that could be opened up for housing. And an example of that that's happened in the inner city was the Newstead and Tenerife area that happened many years ago and now is a booming area. But rather than taking an area like the Gap and fundamentally changing what is a wonderful area, the new approach is, let's change an area that probably could use some change. And so that change in direction effectively came out of the Gap neighbourhood plan. And so we went through a process, I think, of 18 months, 2 years, to decide that the Gap should stay the way it is. And yes, good, as you say, good. And then a new approach came out where it's going to be a targeted, we do have to provide new homes for people, but it's going to be in a targeted way in an area that needs investment and needs revitalisation and could use a lift. And so suburban renewal effectively came out of the discussions that we had around the GAP plan. And so that's a positive thing for the city, I think. And to give you an example of some of the areas that we're looking at now when it comes to renewal, Maruka and Salisbury. Now Maruka, you would know it as used to be called the Magic Mile, where all of the car yards in Brisbane would be located there, and if you wanted to buy a used car or a new car, you would go to the Maruka Magic Mile. And so there was a lot of land taken up by car yards and a lot of industry there as well. And over time, the car yards have moved out and gone to other areas. There's fewer car yards there. There's plenty of choice everywhere else to buy cars if that's what you're interested in. But that's an opportunity where there's quite a large amount of land that could potentially accommodate new homes instead of car yards, or new homes instead of industry. And a lot of the old industries that were in that area have since moved out, and there's a lot of large warehouse space which is not being used to its maximum potential. And so we see the future as, let's have a look for areas like Maruka and Salisbury, where there's those commercial or industrial uses to accommodate new homes, rather than fundamentally changing a wonderful place like the Gap that should stay the way it is. And so it's a different approach, but I think a sensible one, and one that tries to find that balance in providing new homes for people, but also protecting what's great about our wonderful city. So finally, thank you once again to everyone who's been involved in this project, to bring the history of the Gap to life, and then to present that forever in perpetuity to future generations, so that when they go looking for history on this area, it will be there, and it will be there in a very, very comprehensive way, in a way that hopefully helps people understand where we've come from and just the vital importance of protecting what we have, not only in terms of the natural environment and the livability of this area, but also the community spirit that's here. And an important part of community spirit is also understanding the area that you live in. And that's really important, and something that this project has added to. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your commitment to this wonderful part of Brisbane. Thank you for the kind invitation, George and Steve, to come along to join you. And it gives me great pleasure to officially launch this history project. Thank you.
It's been a great day, climate-wise, and a great day in here. I'd like to thank the Lord Mayor for the wonderful words he expressed, particularly in relation to the Gap, where I've lived now for 57 or 60 years. Not the largest, the longest serving person here, but one that's thoroughly enjoyed their residential things that were great to have. Anyway, what I'd like to do now is to thank the Lord Mayor, Adrian Schrinner. We're so grateful to have you as our special guest today, and for you to perform the opening launch of our journey through time. For the 5 people mostly involved in this publication, this is a very special occasion, and is the culmination of 4 years of concentrated effort and dedicated work. The fact that the Lord Mayor of our great city has been seen fit to grace us with his presence and to conduct the launch is something that the people involved and of the Gap will cherish and remember for time to come. Thank you for your attendance, particularly as it is undertaken at a very busy time in compiling the future budget of the various suburbs, together with the myriad of things that have to be taken into account to make it happen.